Have you ever found yourself conflicted, or another phrase is in a pickle? I was thinking about this as I was preparing this talk on addiction. That's where we're going to go today. And I thought about the time I was in middle school. I was in 8th grade. My brother was in 7th grade. And when you were in 8th grade, you got to go work in the office if you had good enough grades and you had a free study hall. You could go, you went through this application process, and they would pick one of you to, during your study hall, to go work in the office. You'd go deliver notes, you'd go deliver things to teachers just to help them out. So I was kind of in a responsibility type position. And my brother, before school started that morning, he had told me when we were on the bus or getting dropped off that he was having some issues with another kid and that they may fight this morning. And so I thought, wow, what do I do here? I kind of want to see my brother take this kid to town, but I also need to stop things. And so I got to school that morning, and it was intense the whole morning. There's tension. You see, they're middle schoolers, so they're not really handling it like adults. They're just kind of walking past each other, just staring them down. And I think there was one time they got shoved up against a locker, one of them, and they never actually really fought, but there was such this conflict of me of following my brother around because he's my brother and I'm going to support him and I'm going to protect him and help him. Even though I was smaller than my brother, I still thought I could do something. Imagine pretty much a 5-foot kid, less than 100 pounds, protecting his brother who's 5 foot, I don't know, probably 6 at that time, and 150 pounds. It's not going to work. But I thought I could do something. And so I was in this conflicted mindset of, I got to support my brother. I got to be there, and I'm going to take him down if he goes after my brother. But on the other side is, I hold kind of this responsibility position of being somebody that works in the office, and the faculty knows me, and trying to solve the issue without the violence. And so all this went down before school, and I remember going to the office, and I knew my brother was in trouble. I knew he was, because there were teachers that saw all this in the morning, and they tried to stop some of it. And so when I go to the office, and I worked in part of the office where it was more the disciplinary side, and not as much the head office where it was more paperwork and stuff like that. So first thing I walk in is they hand me a note to go get my brother. And so I walk up and I go give the study hall teacher the note, and I wait outside and I walk down with them, and we talked a little bit. But it was such a conflicted mindset of what should I do? And I feel oftentimes in our lives, we're in that situation so many times. We're in this conflicted mindset. And I want to suggest to you that that's the same idea that we have with addiction. We live in this conflicted mindset that we don't have this totally clear thinking, which I'll explain here in a minute. We live in a conflicted mindset. And I want you to understand the addiction itself is a problem in its sin. But the root of the issue is the conflicted mind. You can never beat an addiction. You can't overcome an addiction unless you attack the root. Just the reality. What we're doing in our world is we're looking at addictions such as drugs, pornography, alcohol, whatever, fill in the blank. Any addiction that you have, we're trying to attack the addiction from a physical side, but we're not always getting to the root of the addiction. And I think that's the reason we're not beating addiction very successfully. You can beat an addiction, even if you don't get to the root in terms of for a while, for a certain amount of time. But these addictions are birthed out of a root of something. And so I want you to understand that if we're going to talk about addiction today for the next little bit, you have to understand the battle. You have to understand the battle, or you can't overcome this addiction. You just can't. And so, to explain this a little bit, we're going to dive into 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and read 3 verses, and then I'm going to hit another passage, and we'll be done. But it says here in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 3, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of Christ, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So what you have to understand first is when we're looking at something like addiction, just in general, in this battle, it's not a physical battle. So yes, okay, I have a physical battle if you have an addiction with pornography, or I have a physical battle with drugs, or I have a physical battle with alcohol, or I have a physical battle with fill in the blank. There is that physical side of the addiction, but did you catch what it said here in 2 Corinthians 10? For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. We're fighting a spiritual battle. We're fighting a battle that's not like our military who goes out and they face another physical opponent when we're in battle or we're in war. No, we're fighting a war that is inside, that is not seen. We can't see this. It's a spiritual battle, a kind of an invisible war, if you want to say. That's what we're facing. We're in a battle of the mind. And what we're battling is not these physical things, but we're battling lies and agreements. If you want to get to the basis of addictions, it's that root right there. That's the root of the addiction. Lies/agreements. I'll probably use those both interchangeably, but I mean them both, agreements or lies. Because see, to get an overview, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, what happens in our lives is in our stories, in our past, the evil one wants us to think something about ourselves, think something about our past, and get us to begin to believe that. So for example, maybe you fail at something. We talked about failure last week. You fail at something. He wants to say, well, you're never going to measure up. Well, you're not worth anything. Well, you can't beat this. Well, you're just a failure. And what we begin to do is in those lies that the evil one begins to feed us is we begin to have this agreement that's made. Because what's happening inside is, because I need to back up a little bit so you understand this. In the mind, there's two things going at us. God's trying to communicate his truth and his love and his heart to us. Yet the evil one at the same time is trying to communicate lies and everything. Did you catch what it said here? We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of Christ, of God. God's given us him. Satan's given us him. This battle that's conflicting in our minds, we're trying to, they're both fighting for our hearts. And when we give the entryway to these lies and agreements, an addiction is born. Because then we start to believe, maybe I am not worth anything. Maybe I won't ever measure up. And so what we do is we think the addiction is going to solve that pain that we're carrying around inside. We think this addiction is gonna leave us fulfilled, and it's gonna take care of the problem that we're having when we believe this lie and agreement. But that's not the answer. What the answer is attacking the root, which is this lie and this agreement. And so, any addiction you can trace back. Any addiction. Now, I understand at times you'd say, Taylor, well, not every addiction starts that way. What if I was at a party and I just tried drugs, or I tried alcohol, or whatever you want to say, or I watched pornography when I was younger. I just came across it and became addicted. There are the physical side of addictive personalities. You know, somebody that's an alcoholic, if they take one drink, they can't stop, or sex addict, you know, they begin watching pornography or having sex before marriage or with other people, and they just can't stop. I get all that addiction side. But if you back it up way to the beginning of why that's even on the surface. Why did you try those drugs? Why did you drink alcohol? Why did you continue to pursue pornography after it came across your computer? Something in those split-second moments, something the evil one fed you, you believed. Well, it's not going to hurt if I just look at it. Well, it's not going to matter if I just enjoy the night one time. Well, I'm not going to become addicted if I just try pot or cocaine or heroin one time. Well, if I just take one drink, it's not a big deal. Those are the things that we don't take a lot of time to process and think through because they're small ways that Satan wants you to get. See, what Satan wants you to also understand is that you can get all of this knowledge of God and you can get into this relationship with Christ, but if you can keep Satan still getting that foothold in your life and feeding you things, you can have victory for a while. And Satan's okay with that. But Satan doesn't get happy once you begin to break that agreement because once he's lost that foothold, you become a dangerous person. You can do anything. God will help you move through anything. But when we continue to let these things penetrate our heart and our mind, we live in a conflicted mind. And so you have to understand this is what's happening behind the scenes as you're battling addiction. And you really need to take time to sit down and just go, what is it I'm believing? Well, it's not this addiction that's the problem. It's not what you're walking through that's the problem. You need to look back at your story, at your life, and really figure out what is it that I'm believing about myself. Because a lot of people are trying to believe things in their life that they think are true and they're just lies. And I could just sit here and just keep listing these off this list of things that you've probably heard, things that you've said to yourself, things that you believe about yourself. And then you run to something that's going to give you the satisfaction and fulfillment you think, and it leaves you empty. We have to attack the root. The other passage that I think is so good because you have to understand as well. I need to back up here for a split second. The end of verse 5 is super key as we're battling this as well. If you caught it, it says, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. When you're battling addiction and you're battling struggle through something, and you're trying to figure out what is it that is at the root of this. What am I believing about myself or my past or my family or my story that's leading me to try to get fulfillment in other things other than God? What's happening is you're not analyzing every thought. You say, Taylor, I get a bajillion thoughts a day. I can't analyze each and every one of them. Yeah, it becomes difficult, but when you slow down the pace of life, and you thoroughly think through things, and you begin to recognize when these lies and these agreements begin to penetrate your heart, it's a lot easier. You know, I've had many addictions in my life, from drugs to pornography to, if you want to say like disobedience. I don't know if that's really an addiction, but just doing rebellion, all of these things. When you look at the addictions in my life, there's certain lies that I began to believe and thought these would become the fulfillment. A huge one, a lot of people, when they deal with something like an addiction of pornography, they believe the lie that they're lonely. That you're always going to be alone. They're never going to find anybody. And so what happens is every time that they're alone, that lie begins to ring true. No, maybe I will always be alone. And so in order to feel like they're not alone, they go to pornography to feel like that split-second pleasure that I'm not alone. And so when you begin to take every thought captive in your addiction, you go, when pornography starts to become that struggle and you're trying to battle and not do it anymore, you're going to start to recognize those lies. Well, you're always going to be alone. Well, you feel lonely right now. You should go watch this and it's going to help you not feel lonely. Well, you can't stop smoking. You can't stop doing pot, or you can't stop doing heroin because it's just too hard. Or you need this to succumb to the pain in your life. You need this to suppress the agony that you're living in. When you begin to recognize those and you slow down and go, no, that's not true. And you realize who you are, you can begin to take every thought captive. You can begin to analyze, okay, that's not a thought from God. That's something that's being fed to me from the evil one. He's trying to get me to agree with this. He's trying to get me to believe this lie. We need to slow down as a generation and really step back and go, yes, addiction is a problem in our generation. And addiction is a huge struggle in our generation. But it doesn't have to be. We can step back and understand the battle we're in and begin to analyze in our lives what it is we're believing. And we begin to slowly process through the thoughts that are in our mind, and we can start to identify, okay, that's not true. That's not true. And if you believe what is not true, you're going to walk down a path of an addiction. But if you begin to take thoughts captive and believe the truth, then there's this other passage here in John chapter 8 where I'll end. And it says in verses 31 through 36, I'll read really quickly. So Jesus saying to those Jews who had believed him, if you continue to persist, abide in, is another way to say it, in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. They answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have not yet been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son does remain forever. So if the son makes you free, you'll be free indeed. You need to really focus in on this first part as we're talking about lies and agreements and how do we sort through addiction. He says, if you continue, persist, abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples and you will know the truth. How do you combat these lies, these agreements, this addiction? With truth. Now, yes, I understand there's a physical side that you're dealing with and the detox and battling and putting things in place so that you don't fall into these addictions. But if you want to battle the root of these addictions in this war that we cannot see, then you have to know truth. And if you don't abide in God in this relationship, you don't read his word, then how are you going to know truth? Because a lot of people think they know truth, but it's their truth. This right here is the only truth we have. And if you don't abide in it and you don't know it, how can you discern and take thoughts captive and know this is from the evil one and this is from God? You have to know the truth because the truth will set you free. You think of that and you reading it, you go, why does truth set me free? Well, if you understand this whole putting the pieces together, you're being fed lies. And it's birthing sin and addiction. And if we begin to get to the root and say, no, we need to know truth. When they say, I'm not worth anything, Jesus says, you're worth everything. Well, I'm not going to measure up. Jesus said, because of what my son did, you do measure up. Well, I can't be forgiven for that. Jesus paid the price for your sin and you can be forgiven. You are my child. You have to know these truths, and not only do you have to know them, you have to believe them. You have to believe them. Addiction can be beaten. You can have freedom. And we can begin to get rid of all of these struggles in our lives piece by piece. They're not going to go away right away. But if you begin to analyze, what is it that I'm believing in my life that's causing me to go to these things? and combat them with truth, you simply just have to break these agreements. You simply have to say, God, I don't believe that I'm not worth anything. I choose to believe the truth that I am worth so much in your eyes. I break the agreement that I can't be forgiven and that I believe the truth that you've forgiven me. The addiction itself is bad and wrong, I understand. But we're attacking the addiction in the wrong spot, not at the root. What lies or agreements are you believing today? Understand the battle you're in as you battle addiction. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you just for your word. Thank you for just giving us clarity as we begin to understand how to battle addiction. It's a struggle. It's a problem in our generation. And I think what we're trying to do is battle something from the wrong spot, and we need to go to the root. So I pray, Lord, as those that watch this and those that are in addiction, you help them see what they're believing about themselves. You help them see what they're believing about their family, what they're believing about their past, and help them to break those agreements. And as they begin to learn more and more about you and rest in you and walk with you, those are when the addictions begin to fall, because they begin to fall more and more in love with you, and they begin to hate more and more those things that hurt you. So God, we're thankful, and we pray this all in your name. Amen.